Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. We're in Job 32. We're working through the opening of Elihu's speeches. Last time, we met Elihu for the first time, and we did it through the narrator's eyes. We learned who he is, the son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, connected through ancestry back to Abraham's extended family. We learned he had been listening to the entire debate between Job and his three friends. We learned that he was angry at both sides, and we learned why he had held back until now. He was younger than the others, and in the ancient world, you waited for your elders to finish before you opened your mouth. Well, today he opens his mouth. We're going to be in verses 6 through 14, and this is Elihu's first actual speech. And he starts by explaining himself, and then he says something that's going to reframe the debate about wisdom and age and who gets to speak. Let me read through it. So Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, said, I am young in years, and you are old. That is why I was fearful, not daring to tell you what I know. I thought age should speak, advanced years should teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives them understanding. It is not only the old who are wise, not only the aged who understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me. I too will tell you what I know. I waited while you spoke. I listened to your reasoning. While you were searching for words, I gave you my full attention. But not one of you has proved Job wrong. None of you has answered his arguments. Do not say we have found wisdom. Let God, not a man, refute him. But Job has not marshaled his words against me, and I will not answer him with your arguments. All right, so Elihu opens with a confession. He was fearful. He held back because they were older. He thought age should speak and advanced years should teach wisdom. Now, that's not false modesty. That's just a genuine cultural conviction. In the ancient Near East, age carried real authority. The elder had seen more, survived more, accumulated more experience that turned information into wisdom. You didn't interrupt your seniors. You didn't assume that because you had a thought that you had the right to voice it in their presence. You waited. And Elihu had waited for the entirety of the long debate that fills chapters 3 through 31 of this book. He describes the quality of his waiting in verses 11 and 12. He listened while they spoke, gave them his full attention while they were searching for words. He's not describing somebody who's impatient and just biding his time. He was actually paying attention, genuinely, the whole time. But then he watched what happened, and what happened changed his mind about staying quiet. He'd believed that age should teach wisdom. But he's come to see that the actual source of wisdom isn't years of living. It's the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty that gives understanding. The Hebrew word that gets translated as breath here is neshama, the same word used in Genesis 2:7 when God breathed into Adam and he became a living being. Elihu is drawing on that same image. Wisdom's not just a deposit that accumulates over decades. It's a gift of God's breath in a person, and God gives that breath to whom he gives it without regard to age. So the argument isn't that the young are wiser than the old. It's not that experience doesn't matter. It's neither age nor youth is the final word. The source of real understanding is the same for both, the spirit that God puts in a person. An old man without that breath is not any wiser than a young man who has it, and a young man who has it isn't somehow disqualified by his years. This is a thread that runs through Scripture. In Numbers 27, Joshua is set apart for leadership, not because of his age, but because the Spirit is in him. God sends Samuel to anoint the youngest son of Jesse, passing over the older brothers who looked the part more than David. Elihu is operating in that same tradition. The breath of the Almighty goes where God sends it. The credentials of age are not the same credentials of the Spirit. Verse 9 states it pretty plainly. It is not only the old who are wise, not only the aged who understand what is right. In a culture where age was the default credential for wisdom, that's a pretty pointed claim. Elihu isn't being dismissive of his elders. He's challenging a category error. They've assumed that because they're older, they've got better answers. Well, his experience of listening to them has shown that, that assumption doesn't always hold. And so in verse 10, he says, therefore, listen to me. and therefore here is doing a lot of work. The argument from verses 6 through 9 earns him the right to speak. It's not just I have something to say, it's I've worked out why a younger person speaking is legitimate, and here's the case. So he's not barging in, he's making a theological argument for why the floor should be open to him and then stepping into that opening. He waited, listened, and gave the older men every chance to do what wisdom and age were supposed to do. And when none of them proved Job wrong or answered his arguments, that absence of proof became the reason for him to speak. Now, the account he gives of his listening in verses 11 and 12 is pretty specific, and it's not great for the other three. He wasn't just checking in and checking out. He was listening while they were searching for words. He gave them his full attention, even in the pauses, even in the difficult moments where the right argument wasn't coming. And his conclusion after all of that is that not one of them proved Job wrong. None of them answered his arguments. Not that they made some good arguments but fell short, not that the case was partially made. None of them answered his arguments. So that entire 3-cycle debate with Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar going at Job repeatedly from multiple angles, in Elihu's judgment, they didn't land a single decisive blow. Job's legal defense in chapter 31 still stands unanswered. That assessment should sting. Like the three friends came to comfort Job and ended up in a theological argument that they weren't winning. And a younger man who's been sitting quietly in the corner watched the whole thing and is now saying so out loud. What makes it particularly sharp is that the friends had every advantage. They have age and experience and the theological consensus of their world behind them. Retribution theology, the idea that suffering follows sin, was the default position of their world. Job was the one who was swinging against the current, but still none of them answered his arguments. The man with the weaker social position and the harder case actually held his ground through all of it. He tells them, don't say we have found wisdom. Let God, not a man, refute him. This is Elihu catching a specific retreat in advance. The friends have run out of arguments. They've been unable to answer Job, so there's a convenient theological position available to them. Maybe this is beyond human wisdom. Maybe only God can refute a man like Job. So let's defer to God. And, that sounds humble and sounds appropriately reverent, but Elihu isn't buying it because what it actually is, dressed in all the pious language, is a surrender disguised as theology. They didn't find wisdom. They tried, they failed, and now they're trying to exit gracefully by claiming that the matter is beyond them. Elihu refuses to let that pass. He names it before they can even say it. And he's not just saying that they were wrong. He's saying that they know that they were wrong, and he's closing the door on the way out that they were about to take. Now, Job hasn't directed any arguments against Elihu. The speeches in chapters 3 through 31 were between Job and his three friends. Elihu wasn't the target. He wasn't in their sights. And that gives him a different position because he doesn't carry the weight of having already made his case and lost. And he's not going to use their arguments. Whatever the three friends tried, he's going to set that aside. He's not going to recycle the same approach and expect a different result. He's going to start from a different place, making a different case. And we're going to hear what that case is as we continue through Elihu's speeches. But this is the setup. It's a fresh voice who's listened carefully, made theological argument for why he has the right to speak, called out the friend's failure without softening it, and announced that he's going to try something different. Now, whether that something different holds up is the question that the next 5 chapters are going to answer. Next time, we're going to get into the last section of chapter 32. The friends have gone silent, and Elihu describes the inner compulsion that has been building in him the whole time he was waiting. He's going to compare it to wine sealed in a wineskin. All right, hope you have a great day. We'll talk again soon. God bless.